friends, welcome back. Today I thought we would talk a little bit about 3-note per string patterns on the guitar. If you follow me or have studied with me at all, you know that I am a big proponent of the cage system, because the cage system, you know, is really based off of simple kind of cowboy chord shapes, C, A, G, E, and D, and it lets you navigate through chord changes really nicely. But of course there's other systems out, and one of them that is very popular is the 3-note per string system. I do use this system a lot, actually. It's kind of my playing, you know, how I visualize the guitar is kind of a combination of the cage system and some of the 3-note per string shapes and a few other quirky things I found out along the way. So, you know, maybe you've studied with somebody and you've gone over these 3-note per string patterns, and that's great. And basically all it's doing is it's giving you a 3-note per string pattern starting from each note of the scale. So you could do it from a 6-string root, a 5th-string root, and a 4th-string root. So today we're just going to talk about kind of the more common patterns, which is from the 6th-string root, and in some other videos I'll go over some of the other shapes that you find in the 5th-string and 4th-string roots. Okay, so we're going to do it in the key of G today, and there's actually 7 patterns because there's 7 notes in the G major scale. So we'll have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and then back to G again. So there should be a pattern from each one of those notes. So I notice as a teacher, when I sit down with a student for the first time, a lot of times I'll just kind of pick their brain and see what they know, and I'll say, hey, you know, do you know any major scales? And usually the first pattern that they play me is the first one in this sequence. It's 3 notes on the low E string, 2 whole steps, and the same thing on the A string. Then you move up a half step on the D string and you play a half step and a whole step. And the same thing on the G string. Then you move up another half step on the B string and play a whole step and a half. And the same thing on the high E string. That's a relatively easy pattern to play because, you know, there's a lot of repeating patterns, so it's pretty simple. And if you move all those notes up 1 scale degree, you'll get the next fingering, and that's how it works, right? So one thing I want to mention is that a lot of times people refer to these as the modes, and that is correct. They are the modes. So you could say, well, this is G major. It's a G Ionian mode, right? Yeah. So if I play it, you know, the same notes starting from the A note, it's going to be the A Dorian mode, and that's correct. But the truth is that they're all the same notes, so you can use these in any mode in the key of G. Maybe you learn that just to kind of name them. I don't really think of them that way. I kind of think of them if I'm playing in an A Dorian sound, all of these shapes are going to be legal. So let's look at the second shape. All right, starting from the A note, we're going to have a whole step and a half step. And starting on the A string, same fret, and we're going to start from this D note here. We're going to play 2 whole steps. Same thing on the D string, and the same thing on the G string. So that's pretty convenient. Now we're going to jump up a whole step on the B string, so that we should be up here on the 7th fret. We'll play a half step and a whole, and then the same thing on the high E. So we have something like this. And that would be the second pattern in the key of G, which again you might refer to as A Dorian, which it is. All right, then the third shape is going to start from the B note, and what we're going to do is we're going to have a half step and a whole step. Then on the A string we'll have a whole step and a half step. And then the same thing on the D string. Then on the B string, on the G string, we're going to have 2 whole steps. And then on the B string, we're going to move up a half step to this G note here and play 2 whole steps. And then the same thing on the high E string. So we have some people are going to call that the B Phrygian, which is absolutely correct. It is B Phrygian, but like I said, they're all really just the notes of G major, so they can be used as any mode. Any of these patterns can be, and I'll talk a little bit about that once I go over the shapes. Let's look at the fourth shape here, which is starting from the fourth note, which is C. We play 2 whole steps, Now we shift up a half step, so we're on the A string here, we'll have a half step and a whole step. Same thing on the D string. Now the G string changes a little bit, it's a whole step and a half step. Now we shift up to the B string, a half step. We're going to start on this A note here, that's a whole step and a half step. And then 2 whole steps from the D note on the high E string. Again, people might consider that, or might call it C-Lydian, which is true. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that. Let's look at the 5th shape here. This is starting from the D note. This is going to have 2 whole steps on the low E string. The same thing on the A string. And the same thing on the D string. So that's pretty convenient. Now we're going to shift up a half step to the 11th fret. We're going to play a half step and a whole step. Now we're going to shift up another half step on the B string and play half step and whole step again. And then on the high E string, we're going to change to a whole step and a half step. All right, then the 6th shape, starting from the 6th note of the scale, which would be E, we're going to have a whole step and a half step. Same thing on the A string. Now on the D string, we're going to have 2 whole steps. Same thing on the G string. Now we're going to shift up a half step to the C note on the 13th fret of the B string, play 2 whole steps there. And then we're going to shift up again to the 14th fret on the high E string and play half step and a whole step. And then the last pattern is going to be starting from the F sharp tone, which is the 7th note, therefore the 7th pattern. We're going to play a half step and a whole step. Same thing on the A string. Now on the D string, we're going to switch to a whole and a half. And the same thing on the B string, or excuse me, the G string. Now on the B string, we're going to shift up a half step and play 2 whole steps. And then the same thing on the high E string. This is actually a pretty easy pattern because it's got a lot of repetitive. And then we're back to where we started on another G note there, up an octave. So those are the 7 patterns. And like I mentioned, depending on who you hang out with, people might describe them as different modes. People might describe them as pattern 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, however you want to describe it. The way I think about it is these are all just patterns of G major, and G major is A Dorian, it's B Phrygian, it's C Lydian, so it's all the same. So you can use them in any of those contexts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on a couple of backing tracks just I found on YouTube that you know, are different modes that are in the key of G, and I'm just going to play around with some of these so you can see that you can use any of them. So the first one I have is C Lydian. Let's check it out. All right, so you can see I was just kind of playing some different licks and riffs based off of those 3 note per string patterns. All of them basically, just kind of having a good time playing around with them. And I'll give you some ideas here at the end. I just want to show you how this kind of works. Let's try another one. Let's say A Dorian. A Dorian is also G major, so I'm going to just find a little A Dorian backing track and I'm going to play the exact same shapes we just talked about. It should sound pretty good. Let's check it out. right, sounds pretty good. I was just kind of traversing through some of those 3-note per string shapes and playing some patterns and stuff that I know from those. Let's try one more. D mixolydian, that's the 5th mode of G, so all these patterns should work as D mixolydian. All right, let's check it out. All right, so all worked, right? Of course, I'm throwing in some other stuff too. I'm throwing in some arpeggios and stuff. But the cool thing is that similar to the cage system, I can see a lot of chord shapes off of these 3-note per string too. So I can see like all the arpeggios that come from this too. So I got, there's G major 7, there's A minor 7, there's B minor 7, there's C major 7. So not only do I see the scale pattern, I also see the arpeggio of the chord. And some other little artifacts in there that are pretty cool too. So this is why it's such a great system. You can use it for blending with your cage system, or blending even with just your pentatonics and stuff like that, and getting some different things. Now the cool thing about the 3-note per string patterns, of course, is that it lends to legato style technique, right? So if you're doing kind of like hammer-ons and pull-offs and this kind of liquidy sound, well, of course the 3-note per string is going to be great for that. And I do a lot of those kind of licks too. So, you know, just that kind of sound is kind of baked into it. But another cool thing about it that a lot of people don't think about is you can reorganize those notes. So, for example, what I like to do is just think of them as 3 notes on a string. So I'm just going to label them notes 1, 2, and 3. So if I play kind of up the scale, maybe starting on the first pattern here, I'm just going to number these as 1, 2, and 3. So I have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and so on, right? So the cool thing is you can rearrange those a number of different ways. Of course, you could just play 3, 2, 1. And you start to get some more interesting phrases. You could label it maybe as 2, 1, 3. Or maybe you could go 3, 1, 2. So it'll you know, just by expanding that a little bit, it gets you away from just kind of running up and down the scales in consecutive order, and you can get a little bit more mileage out of these shapes that way. Another thing I think about too is phrasing. Of course, when you have 3 notes on a string, it's going to feel really natural to phrase them in some kind of a triplet feel, right? But I like to think of 3 notes in different feels. So I could play it as triplets, which would be triplet, 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 triplet. But I could also play it as a 1 and a 2 and a 3. It's 3 notes, but now it's more of a 16th note feel. And I can put all those different permutations to those rhythms too. And so I like to think in terms of how I'm going to phrase it, what the order of the notes are, and that way I get a little bit more mileage out of those 3-note per string shapes. So basically, if you're playing anything that relates to that key, in this case I'm doing it in key of G, so any mode in the key of G, A Dorian, B Phrygian, C Lydian, those are all different modes. I can use any of them. So don't get hung up on the names of the shapes, how people name them. because really, if you're playing in that sound, all of the shapes are going to be legal. All right, cool. So that's 3-note per string patterns rooted on the low E string. Now, of course, I like to see these also rooted on the A string and the D string. Even though technically they're kind of the same patterns, you think of them a little bit different, you know, and then it allows you to start to connect them to chords a little bit more. And, you know, you can start connecting them to the triads and the arpeggios too, which I like to mix in there too. But that's for another day. Just today I wanted to just talk about the 3-note per string system, how it works. If you haven't been hip to it, I would really learn it. You know, there's no battles between the caged and the 3-note per string. Learn both, right? So, and you'll have even more tools in your arsenal. And then of course go through and reorganize them, play them with different rhythms, and you know, just explore those different sounds that you can use them in. And I will see you next time around. Cheers.